Video lesson 4.3, the start of World War II. Okay, so we're going to back up a little bit into the interwar period and all the way to 1923. So this is the first time that, well, we realize that Germany is failing to pay their war reparations. And so France and Belgium invade the Ruhr, which is Germany's most important industrial zone, and also borders France. It's in the Rhineland. And this is against the League of Nations rules. So France and Belgium, the reason this is important is France and Belgium set an example or a precedent for other League members that it's okay to break the rules of the League of Nations. So the League here is the League of Nations that we're going to talk about. So it's okay to break the rules. Rules don't matter. Whatever. That's important because this undermines the League's authority in Europe, and so it basically makes the League of Nations pointless. Now this comes into play in the next 2 decades leading up to World War II because it makes the League less effective. The League of Nations can no longer do its job and enforce the rules if they break the rules themselves. So it's similar to if I said no cell phones in the classroom, yelled at one kid for not having a cell phone in the classroom, but then told another student to get their cell phone out and look the other direction. It makes the rules pointless if it's not applied to everybody. Okay, so Hitler is in power starting in 1933. So 10 years later, Hitler's position is that Germans belong to an Aryan or superior race. And these ethnic Germans need more space. We'll get to, next class, we'll get to anti-Semitism and his hatred of Jews and how this wraps into everything with World War II. But essentially, his whole philosophy is that Germans were the best ethnicity and that Germans in particular needed more space to live. So all other ethnicities do not matter as much. And because land equals power, the superior race needs more land. So that is the notion of Lebensraum. Now, also in the interwar period, this is how the League of Nations and the countries involved, the United States, Great Britain, France, Russia, the other countries involved, they feel that another war would be worse than the last. They know that machinery has advanced and World War I was bad enough. The damages are still not paid for or recovered from, both emotionally, physically, financially. So another war would be much worse than the last. Also, these allies no longer trust each other. So the main person that the Allied powers don't trust is Russia because they are a totalitarian regime, a non-democratic regime. So they're a little wary of the USSR and they don't like communism, but there hasn't been any open remarks made to break that alliance, so they're still technically allies. So they also admit that the Treaty of Versailles might have been a little too harsh, so they kind of want to give Germany a break so that, you know, he can play the game a little bit with the Allied powers because they really did destroy Germany with the Treaty of Versailles. So they get a little lax on the rules. There's something called the Dawes Plan that allowed the war reparations to be paid off more gradually than they originally stated. A fourth thing, Hitler was very good at deception or lying. So they didn't have any reason not to trust him at first. And fifth reason is that the French share a border with Germany, so that they are the most vulnerable. So they kind of have a different perspective on this whole situation. And they're all experience economic depression. So it creates a very difficult environment for war because war is expensive. It causes domestic problems, and they already have domestic problems. It could further their debt because they're paying for soldiers to go to war, paying for weapons up front, these kinds of things. So war is very expensive, and they couldn't really afford war at the time. Not only would it be worse than the last, it would be more expensive than the last, and they already have less money because of the Great Depression. Okay, so that's where this policy of appeasement comes into play. You can see my little kitty. He is trying to appease his violent aggressor. So appeasement is a policy initiated by Neville Chamberlain, who is our British Prime Minister, of giving Hitler what he wanted in order to keep Hitler from going to war. So Neville Chamberlain led this policy and led this initiative, but the other Allied powers followed. We will give you what you want as long as we don't have to go to war again. War is the absolute last resort. So, the definition officially, appeasement is the policy of settling international conflicts by admitting and satisfying demands through rational negotiation and compromise, thereby avoiding an armed conflict which would be expensive, bloody, and possibly dangerous. The result? Hitler becomes a spoiled brat. Similar to if every time your 2-year-old asks you for a lollipop, you give them the lollipop to keep them from throwing a temper tantrum. That kid then thinks that they can hold that temper tantrum over your head, and they have the power, they have the control, and they become a spoiled brat, similar to Hitler. So you can think of Hitler from now on as a spoiled brat. Okay, so we have another spoiled brat on our hands, but not really a spoiled brat as much as Hitler is, and we'll get to what Hitler was given as his lollipops in a second. Italy, another fascist dictator, Mussolini. In 1935, he decides that he wants to take over Abyssinia, which is the entire Horn of Africa where Ethiopia and Somalia are. Now, Italy already has Libya and Somalia. You can see the green areas on the map below are the Italian lands. So they wanted Abyssinia to complete their possession of the Horn of Africa. Africa is still a very contested territory. And remember, the whole reason the Berlin Conference happened was to avoid going to war over Africa. So, Ethiopia had successfully resisted imperialism against the Italians. However, the Italians still want it. So, 30 years later, the Italians try to invade Abyssinia. So the Abyssinians, or the Ethiopians, appeal to the League of Nations. And so the League of Nations then orders all League members to impose strict economic sanctions on Italy. Economic sanctions are basically punishments, so increased fines for what they're doing. 3 members don't really, they say, yeah, sure, we'll impose sanctions, but they don't really actually do it. So Italy is not punished for their breaking of League rules. So Italy successfully occupies this territory, and so then they break League rules. The League of Nations is again shown to not be very powerful, and even its own members don't respect the rules that they make for themselves. So it's kind of a worthless organization at this point. There's no official punishments, there's no official rules to follow or protocol to follow, and so Italy ends up imperializing this part of Africa. Speaking of imperialism and other fascist regimes, Japan, we have a military dictatorship, so the ruler of the commander of the military is the dictator, essentially. So in 1931, Japan decides to invade a region of China known as Manchuria. So they've already built an industrial empire, but they want to build a political empire as well. So they're also experiencing the Great Depression. They want to then invade an industrial region of China in hopes of overcoming this depression. So in 1933, the League of Nations, all-powerful League of Nations, ordered Japan to leave Manchuria. Japan said, well, if you're going to make us do that, then we just won't be in the League of Nations anymore. You don't really matter anyway. So we'll leave, but we'll still keep Manchuria. The League did nothing. But the United States established an oil embargo, which means that they cut off trade of oil to Japan. So because they warned Japan of this, and Japan did not leave Manchuria, then the U.S. eventually inputs an oil embargo. Japan is not very happy with this, and we'll talk about that more when we talk about the start of the Pacific Theater after break. So, back to Europe. Here's what happens between 1935 and 1938. Germany rebuilds their army in 1935. They reoccupy the Rhineland in 1936. They support Italy in Ethiopia in 1935, and they demand Austria and successfully take over Austria in 1938. And then in 1938, after successfully taking over Austria with their military, Hitler demands Czechoslovakia. So this is another older part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So Neville Chamberlain, Prime Minister of Britain, decides that enough is enough. So Hitler and I need to sit down and have a conversation, because Hitler just wants the Sudetenland, which is the kind of darker yellow shaded region right next to Germany and Austria, both German territories. And this is an area with a substantial German population and important industrial resources. So Neville Chamberlain and Hitler meet at Munich, which is a city in Germany. And Neville Chamberlain negotiates peace. So basically he enacts his policy of appeasement. He does not want Germany to go to war with Czechoslovakia and invade them with their military, because that would pretty much destroy Czechoslovakia, and it would lead to mobilization of Germany and increasing Germany's power. So Neville Chamberlain doesn't want war, but he also doesn't want Hitler to gain too much power and too much land and start taking over other parts of Europe, because then we'd really have a problem. So we need to negotiate peace. So basically, Hitler and Neville Chamberlain sit down at the Munich conference, and he gives in to his demands to avoid war. And Hitler, in return, promises, cross my heart and hope to die, not to invade Czechoslovakia with his military in exchange for the ethnically German Sudetenland. So Chamberlain says, you're right, they're German, they should be in a part of Germany, so you can have the Sudetenland, which, by the way, Czechoslovakia was not present at this meeting. So you can have the Sudetenland as long as you promise not to invade Czechoslovakia with your military. And Hitler totally agrees to this. He promises. However, he invades Czechoslovakia with his military, 5 months later, in March of 1939, despite this Munich Pact, and then establishes a protectorate over Czechoslovakia as well as Austria. So this is important, and this is kind of the final straw, because his invasion of Czechoslovakia was the end of appeasement. After this, Chamberlain said, okay, we know Hitler is lying and he is capable of deception. We also know that he wants land and he wants it bad. It shows that Hitler was not just interested in a greater Germany, he's interested in taking over Europe. And that's a much scarier thing, because the Czechs were not German, they're ethnically Czech. So on the 17th of March, Neville Chamberlain gives a speech to the British saying that he can no longer trust Hitler not to invade other countries, so we need to keep an eye on Hitler. On the 31st of March, Chamberlain guaranteed to defend Poland if Germany invaded, because Poland is kind of the last bastion of Europe. It is to the east of Germany. To the west of Germany is France. So we're not too worried about France. We don't think Germany will take over powerful France. But Poland is a little weaker. It's one of those new nations. So he thinks Germany is going to invade Poland. And he officially promises that Britain will defend Poland if Germany invades. So, in the quest for Lebensraum, Hitler does decide to invade Poland. And he realizes, there's another allied power on the other side of Poland who also might want Poland. And that is the USSR. So to neutralize the possibility that the USSR would come to Poland's aid, Germany signs a non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union, or the USSR, on August 23, 1939. In a secret clause of the agreement, the ideological enemies, a fascist and a communist, agree to divide Poland between them. So this was a secret. But it's also an agreement not to compete with each other if Germany invades Poland. If Germany invades Poland and takes over Poland, then he'll split it with Russia. That is essentially what this pact said. So Hitler gives the orders for the Poland invasion to begin on August 26th. But on August 25th, he delayed the attack when he learned that Britain had signed a new treaty with Poland, promising military support should it be attacked. So, finally, on September 1st, 1939, Germany sends 1.5 million troops to invade Poland along its almost 2,000-mile border with German-controlled territory. You can see the orange Poland is almost as big as the gray German Reich down there. You can see that's in part thanks to their takeover of Czechoslovakia. And on the other side, you see the Soviet Union. So simultaneously, as these 1.5 million German troops are invading on the ground, the Luftwaffe, or the German Air Force, bombs the Polish airfields, totally wipes out their air force, and the German Navy and U-boats attack Polish naval forces in the Baltic Sea. We see now why the Treaty of Versailles wanted to limit Germany's military. So they are being hit land, air, and sea. Poland is being attacked on all fronts. And Hitler claims this massive invasion was a defensive action. He claims that he was somehow defending himself against Poland and he wanted to eliminate the threat. But Britain and France are not convinced. They're also losing a little bit of trust in their ally. So on September 3rd, 1939, Great Britain and France, true to their treaty with Poland, declare war on Germany, and World War II officially begins. Now, this is known as the European theater. We're going to talk about a second beginning of World War II in the Pacific theater, and that has to do with Japan and the United States. The United States is involved in both theaters of war, and they're called theaters. I don't really know why, but these realms of war are called theaters of war. So we have the European theater and the Pacific theaters, where these two kind of wars take place. So all over the world is essentially in war between the years 1939 and 1945.